Okay, good morning, Happy New Year. This is a time of new beginnings. 1 year ago, I would never have imagined I'd be standing here today in the snow. We had never heard of each other, we weren't on each other's radar at all. And here we are in this new year, in a new beginning. 1 year ago, I was in Honduras, and I was training new members of the accompaniment project team. And that's when I first glimpsed that I was headed into transition. It came in the form of unexplained and unexpected tears at the end of the training. Now I realize I was just beginning to feel that undercurrent in my life, and that it was taking a deep U-turn. Friends and families will tell you how I resisted, how I clung to that riverbank because I so loved that part of the river, how they helped to pry my fingers loose so I could release my grip, so I could move on and let go of the way I had come thus far, encouraging me to be curious about what lay ahead. It was my husband, Tom, who found you, because he is the finder of everything. Our friend Betsy, who's a professor of English, always introduces Tom by saying, if I'm ever on one of those survival programs where they dump you in the middle of some deserted island with nothing and you have to survive and you can only take one thing, she says, I'll take Tom. So when his email came to my inbox, I think sometime in June, with the subject line, you need to look at this. This is for you. I remember sitting up and paying attention. And what I saw in C3 helped me to peek around the bend, to imagine that there may be something up ahead where the work of compassion and justice and growth as human beings continues, where the river opens again and again. Transition takes time, it moves through stages, there's an ending, a gap time, and a new beginning. And that gap time, that betwixt and between, that wilderness time, is such a challenge, such a teacher, such a time to grow. And it's not an easy place, it's uncomfortable, it can be terrifying, and it's easy to short-circuit that process, to get out too soon, or refuse it altogether. We may stay in old arrangements for too long, and the growth does not unfold. I want to thank you all for the process, the patience, the care, the discernment, the listening, for taking the time to allow me to arrive, to undergo the work of transition that we've all had to undergo, for staying in the gap and living out that time. Word of your decision came in December when I was in Honduras leading a human rights delegation. And there I was at the end of 2015, precisely in the place where my transition began 11 months earlier, with 12 amazing women, partners, and work that I care deeply about, right in the thick of it. And when news came of your decision, I felt a clear, strong yes. This is the next part of the journey, the proper alignment, a threshold crossed. We are in the river, taking the next bend. It's a mystery, the timing of these situations or events that periodically deflect us from the course that we thought we were on. These transitions, endings, and new beginnings. At the time, they may feel impossibly difficult, disastrous timing, not what we had planned. And often, in retrospect, there's a deep beauty stretching out behind us. Craighead is an artist whose life and work have been a teacher for me. As a young woman, Mine Reid fell in love with Dorothy Day and the work of the Catholic worker. And she talks about writing an impassioned letter declaring her intent to be part of the Catholic worker, to work with Dorothy and feed the hungry. But, she says, Dorothy kindly answered me saying that my calling was to be an artist, and as such, I could feed the hungry. So Mine Reid accepted that unexpected deflection from the course she thought she was on. She stayed in her gap, she studied art, She made her bend in the river. She spent 14 years in a Benedictine abbey, feeding souls with her art, and she was recognized around the world. And then, in 1980, she says it was time to leave. She writes, the same spiritual energies which guided me into the monastery were now calling for me to leave. There was something I was supposed to do that I couldn't do there. I loved monastic life. At 44 years old, it would be hard to start a new life, but I had to trust it. She did the work of mental and emotional transformation. She let go, crossed over. And she said, only after I left did I begin to understand that this transition was necessary for the next cycle of growth and creativity. Her life and art took a new turn. To make an end is also to make a beginning. 2015 was a transition year for all of us on some level in the life of C3 as a community, perhaps in your personal or family life, as a species of human beings and the planet. We are all in transition. And as we embark on this new year and new beginning, we can prepare for the next cycle of growth and creativity by taking a moment also to look back, to understand what we have undergone. Our friend David is an Episcopal priest, and he's an interim pastor, and all he does is walk with communities while they're in transition from one cycle of growth to another. And I asked him, what's the most important thing that communities need to do in that transition time? And he said the most important thing is for the community to do the work of grieving, letting go, understanding the past, look back over the river, see if there's anything left unfinished that needs to be released, cleared, tended to, held up, remembered. And it is also the time to integrate learning from the last cycle, glean the gifts and the wisdom, carry them forward into the next cycle of growth and creativity. Reflecting on this particular transition in my life, these are two pieces of wisdom that I carry forward. First, trust the flow, the place on the river that I clung to in Nicaragua because I loved it so. The furious turbulence of Honduras, this new stretch ahead, full of possibility. It is the same river. Each ending opens into a new beginning. And second, is that sometimes new beginnings are a privilege. And with that privilege comes great responsibility. I was reminded of this in Honduras in December, where people gathered with us, so many women and children, to share their stories, lives in which there's not 1 minute of one day when they or their children are safe, where every household, little store, taxi driver pays extortion money to an array of armed actors that prey on them and their children, where at any moment armed actors can come in and take their house and say, get out, we're taking it. They take entire blocks. We're taking 2 streets, you have 48 hours to get out. They can take your children. The words that fill my notebook: rape, hell, militarization, terror. Sometimes new beginnings are a privilege, and with that privilege comes responsibility. In listening to some of you reflect on your transition as a community, this is some of what I hear. That you have learned who you are in a deeper way. You've clarified your values. You've created participatory, collaborative, inclusive, and horizontal structures. And you've learned to be leaders. These are gifts to carry forward. And we will need them because our personal and community transitions are nested within larger cycles of transition and change. Here are a few voices from the end of 2015. UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon. 2015 was a year of human suffering and migration tragedies. Specialists on migration say that new mass migrations are not people seeking a better life. They are driven by deadly conflict, war, concentration of land into plantations, destruction of habitat due to contamination of water and land, drought, desertification, resurgence of mining, all expel communities. Former President of Ireland and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson. We are the first generation to fully understand the dangers of climate change, and the last generation with time to do something about it. Time is running out. Latin American liberation theologian Leonardo Boff. The old paradigm answers war with war. With war becoming ever more destructive, we could put an end to our species or make our Earth home uninhabitable. The new paradigm for this global phase of Earth and humanity must be one of comprehension, hospitality, dialogue, inter-exchanges without borders, win-win alliances among all. Black Lives Matters, Ashley Yates. We are at a breaking point in this country right now. And philosopher, activist Grace Lee Boggs, who died at age 100 in October in Detroit. And at the end of her enormous life, she pointed to a new beginning. Read her words again. We are in an epic transition, she says. People are aware that we cannot continue in the same old way. We must create an alternative. We are at a great turning point in human history when the survival of our planet and the restoration of our humanity require a sea change in our ecological, economic, political, and spiritual values. Everyone speaks of mega transition, the urgency of making an end and a new beginning as human beings on this earth. Collectively, as human beings, we are in a gap. That betwixt and between time, between an old system that we must let go of and a new one that we must embrace. And here are just two little snapshots of that gap time. The first from the Spiritual Inquiry Circle here at C3 in November. And the topic was environmental sustainability. We were talking about the Paris Climate Summit because it was starting the next day. We were talking about the call to keep fossil fuels in the ground and make that transition off of fossil fuels. And we were talking about the coal plant in Grand Haven. And people said, well, it's really difficult. City planners say coal is clean and climate change is not real. It was not real it was a little not real encouraging, the conversation. So we were all sort of staring out the window for a little while. And then someone said, and there's the smokestack right there. We were in this room right here, and they pointed to the smokestack. And it's spewing white smoke, he said. If it were black smoke, people would be alarmed. But it's white smoke, so no one's worried about it. And things got even quieter as the implications of that true statement sunk in. And then he said, and by the way, that is a green roof right there in front of you, in case you didn't know what it was. And I hadn't seen it, and there it was, in the same window, the smokestack at a green roof. There it was, like one of those courageous little dandelions that breaks through the crack in a parking lot. The coal plant spewing its white smoke, and as someone told me, requires 300 some acres of land each year to dump its ash on, and a little green roof. The old system that we must let go of, and the new one we need to embrace. And at one point, Joanne, who was in the circle, got up and said, you know, we don't really need all these lights on, and she turned them off. And that's the awareness we need to make a new beginning that is environmentally sustainable. And the second snapshot from Casa Alianza in Honduras in December. Casa Alianza is a center in Tegucigalpa for street children. There are 15,000 some street children in just the two largest cities of Honduras, not one government shelter. Casa Alianza takes the children in, and with each child develops a life plan and accompanies that child until they are able to live it independently. And they advocate for the children of Honduras, which, because it has become a major transport route for drugs making their way to the US market, has become one of the most violent countries in the world. And Casa Alianza documents that on average, 90 children are killed each month on the streets of Honduras. The real number is higher because they're only working from reported cases. And they document that state security forces are responsible for failing to protect and for killing street children, because militarized security strategies see the street children as a threat, as a crime vector. When the director of Casa Alianza, an amazing man, Guadalupe Ruelas, published his findings, he was beaten up by the military police in front of the presidential palace and thrown in jail. Millions of US dollars have been pumped into Honduras for this security plan. Everywhere we went in Honduras, people said, this is not security, this is a nightmare. And we said, who benefits? And they said, oh, it's good business. Military contractors, gun security, equipment manufacturers, and private security companies are landing huge contracts. And they say, instead of more guns, military operations, and special forces, we need human security, restoration of trust, human relationships, and repair of the social fabric. The last day in Honduras, our delegation met with the US ambassador. We were 13 women. Many of them were Sisters of Mercy. They were justice coordinators. These are the nuns on the bus, committed, compassionate women. They had come from El Salvador for the commemoration of the murder of the 4 US church women who were murdered in the 80s there. The case remains in impunity. And the sisters carefully presented concerns about militarization, about US policy, repeating mistakes of the past. And the ambassador told the sisters he did not like the way the conversation was headed and warned that he didn't want to get into a fight with them. So here we were again, 2 paradigms, militarization and war, or human security, restoration of trust, human relationships, repair of the social fabric. If individual and community transitions are challenging, imagine what it will take for a transition of epic proportions. The stakes are high. The challenge cannot be underestimated. Denial is massive, resistance fierce. The old power system does not embrace the transformation that we must undergo. Retrenchment, lashing out, clutching to old arrangements, and structuring of power as things fall apart. Just listen to the presidential debates. This is where we begin in 2016. How can we do our part to embrace the transition that we must undergo? C3 has laid important groundwork for the creation of a compassionate Western Michigan through the Charter of Compassion, and you are ready to clarify that vision and make it operational. Next year, when Dr. Joan Campbell is speaking about the Charter of Compassion in whatever part of the world her journey takes her to, and hopefully it will be Cuba, she can hold us up as an example and say, this is what they're doing in Western Michigan. And we must also do our inner work. That includes grappling with personal and collective shadow. This will carry us into greater authenticity and wholeness, deepen our root, help us take our seat, and hold the center. We need to listen to and build relationships at the breaking points with those that are oppressed, rejected, and targeted by the dominant culture. Look to and work from the bottom up. We must reach back to our past and history and attend to whatever remains unfinished, must be cleared, and requires healing in our lives as individuals, families, and a country. And we must lead, carrying with us gifts and wisdom we have gleaned, pointing to and paddling as hard as we can to make this next bend in the river of our common humanity. At the beginning of 2016, just 2 weeks into this new year, I'm also reminded that for far too many, there is not such a beautiful looping river that stretches behind their lives. For far too many, the cycles of growth are not able to flow. 2016 opened with a Department of Homeland Security announcement that they were going to conduct raids throughout the country, targeting mostly mothers and children that fled violence in Central America in the last 2 years. In the 1980s, refugees also fled Central America. That was a time when social movements and poor people were trying to make a new beginning in their countries. But social justice was considered a threat to the old arrangements, so military dictatorships and US counterinsurgency wars put an end to it. Today, people flee violence again. This time, it's a violence that has metastasized, but it is rooted in social and economic injustice and the wars of the 1980s that left too many guns and death squads in place and cut off possibilities for a new beginning. This week, I visited Muskegon Heights, and it was an honor. I was given a tour, I was given time, and I was given stories. And I have much more to learn. But I did come away once again with that feeling of the legacy of a society that never consciously did the work of transition after slavery in this country. There was no transitional justice, no truth commission, public apology, reparation, no looking back as a country to learn the lessons, to grieve that massive crime against humanity, so that the work of redress, repair, healing, and atonement could flow. As a society, we left a massive trauma on our river, and we're still in that gap, needing to undergo the transformation that we must undergo to let go and cross over from old arrangements and embrace new ones, so that the children in those libraries that the community fought for and built book by book can see a new beginning. And so that we can all look back over our river and see something beautiful stretching out behind us. The closing affirmation comes from Wounded Knee. On December 29th, 2015, people marked the 125th anniversary of the massacre of Chief Spotted Elk, who was a peacemaker, and some 400 Sioux and Lakota at Wounded Knee. For the last 25 years, riders on horseback have retraced the steps of their ancestors to Wounded Knee, riding through snow, below freezing temperatures for 8 days. They reach back, they grieve, they tend to what remains unfinished, and they heal hearts at Wounded Knee. At the close of 2015, they dedicated their ride to the healing of ancient wounds and to end the transmission of wounding, to end genocide, massacres, to end racism, to end war. They say, all peoples have suffered for so very long. Our earth is suffering with us. Either we grow and heal together or we perish. We invite all now to consciously face, embrace, and pledge to heal these our deepest wounds, so that we can bask in our birthright of joy, wisdom, freedom, love, beauty, and peace. We are much more than we have known, they tell us. New years and new beginnings are also times of blessings. And at the opening of each new year, I conduct one very simple ritual. I draw one rune as a meditation, as a blessing for the year ahead. So for this year, Unjo is the rune. Joy and light, a fruit-bearing branch. The shift that was due has occurred. Now you can rejoice, having been carried across the gap. Joyousness accompanies new energy. Light pierces the clouds, touches the waters, just as something lovely emerges from the depths. This also is where we begin.